Hello and welcome to this week's live event. My name is Jeff Rolka. This is week number 32, which is hard to imagine actually that we've been doing this for almost a year, that the live events have been going out there. Hello, Aldo. Welcome as well. It's good to see you, Capone. Fellas, we are on air now. Question comes later. Okay, great. Good afternoon, JC's Radiant Ray. That was awesome. You guys all just like shot out there. Really, really cool. I only have one question. Hello, Blue Third Up. Hello, Heidi. Welcome. I've just got one leftover question. Before I dive in, a couple housekeeping things. Didn't do any videos this week because what happened was I had a cold. And it wasn't like a really bad cold, but then from Wednesday onto Thursday, and on Thursday, like it seemed like it was getting really, really, really bad. And what I had forgotten was that I occasionally, like it's so random that I don't really think about it. I occasionally get migraines. And so what was happening was I had the cold, and then a migraine kind of snuck in under the radar and just like wiped me out. And the fact is that hello, Skyt Hussein, that the video I shot was just not really up to snuff. So we're gonna do that again. But the thing is that the video I shot was meant to answer a question that I said I was going to answer in the live event. Anyways, hello, Michael, and hello, Nancy. Welcome to the live event this week. So the question was, and I'll just dive into this now. Hello, Gerald Ryan. Welcome. Burning the midnight oil again. I guess I should say, before I dive in, thank you if you've chosen to subscribe. If you haven't yet, I hope you'll consider doing so now. The chat's open and is already in use, I should say. So please be not hesitant. Be not shy. You can feel free to just say hello, welcome back, Dwayne, or if you've got a question, it's almost certain that you are not the only person that wants to ask that question. So chime in, please. And Nancy, I will get to your question just a moment. But the question was when to transpose. And that's a tricky question. There's no real easy answer to when to transpose. But I did think of a couple different guidelines. One is if it's written for a different vocalist that has a completely different range from you. So if you're a soprano and it was written for a tenor, well, those things aren't the same. The tenor's secondo passaggio is in a fundamentally different part of the scale system, the Western, where it is on the keyboard, from where yours is. And placing the song in an appropriate area can give it a more authentic feel, even though it's in a different key from the original. I more frequently change keys when they're too low than when they're too high. Certainly, when it's too high, we'll adjust it down. But often, we neglect that going too low can be just as much of a problem, and that's a much harder limit than the upper register. When you find, and the question was, when do you change keys versus working on range expansion? The time to start thinking about your range and expanding your range is when, if you put it in a key where the high notes work, but it's getting too low for you, then you need to work on the other end of the spectrum. It needs to be high enough so that the lowest notes in the piece are in a reasonably good range. And if that means that the high notes in the piece are outside of your range as it exists at the time that you're working on it, you need to start working on those registration events and working on your upper register. Now, those are kind of objective reasons why we might change the key of a song. Subjectively, the list is virtually endless. I routinely change keys of songs just to try it, just to see what it might feel like. I'll change keys. If I'm playing it on guitar, I will change keys all the time in order to see what it might be like in different fretting positions and how I might face the chords with my left hand. I'll change it for different capo facings to see how that may affect the overall vibe of the tune, and then try to come to some consensus on how it's going to feel on the guitar versus how it sounds with my voice, and working it out from there. One other objective reason to change keys is to sharpen your aural skills. By moving the key around quite a bit of a song, it can hold you more accountable. It can make you more aware of when you're kind of fudging notes and not really certain of what you're supposed to be singing there. And you change the key, and it can hold you more accountable and help you dial in your melody so that the overall performance, even when you just go back to your home key, if that's where you started, is going to be more accurate in general. Additionally, when we practice range, it's a sort of generally accepted practice to vocalize a minor third at least, give or take. I mean, at least is kind of perhaps not. It doesn't have to be at least. It's not as if the higher you go, the better it gets. But generally, we want to vocalize at least a minor third above the highest pitch of any given song that we're singing. So if, it's an F natural above middle C is the highest note that you have to sing in the song, we want to vocalize it to an A flat so that when we bring it all back in, it kind of feels a little bit easier. And so changing the key will allow us to do that. We can move things around. I do hope that answers that question. It really does vary a lot from person to person why we would go about changing keys of songs. Sometimes I change keys just to see what the different vibes will feel like. What does it feel like when I put the highest note right in my zona de passaggio? What's it like when I move it so it's just below it? What is it like when I move it so that it's above the zona de passaggio? How does it feel? How does the melody work with that? Those are the kinds of questions I ask myself. And when I'm working with someone on a tune, I ask in context of our lessons together to try to help them really, really find the key that's truly the best for the song, for them as a vocalist, and for the performance of that song that they wish to do. So, there you go. Okay, Nancy's asking, pardon me, I have a question. How do I make my mixed voice sound more chestier? So, the concept of mixed voice is that terminology gets used in a variety of different ways. If you go by contemporary pedagogy, almost the entirety of our ranges is a blending of thyroarytenoid dominant singing voice and cricothyroid dominant singing voice. It's just which one is more dominant than the other. When we're in thyroarytenoid dominant voice, it's not that the cricothyroid muscles are completely inactive. That's not the case. Almost always it's not the case. And conversely, when we're in cricothyroid dominant singing voice, it's not as if the thyroarytenoid muscles are completely inactive. We're always in this blend. Now, usually when people talk about mixed voice, they're talking about, well, in my circle of teaching and work, the mixed voice is the zona de passaggio. That is where the energerial output from thyroarytenoid dominant singing voice and cricothyroid voice are almost balanced. And that can be very, very challenging. Oftentimes people are talking about mixed voice and they're talking about their upper register, which I would refer to as cricothyroid dominant singing voice. So in either case, though, if you are, and I hope that's not too loud. I've got a different setting going on. Let me know if any of this stuff, if you can't hear, it's too loud or whatever. I've had to fuss with things because I had some bad cables or something. In either case, in order to have a chestier sounding cricothyroid dominant singing voice, or mixed voice, if you will, or head voice, we have to retain more of the resonances that are created in our thyroarytenoid dominant singing voice. And that means being lighter on the musculature as we ascend. So if I'm here, and I'm ultimately heading beyond the secondo passaggio, if I'm too heavy on my chest voice as I'm making my way through the secondo passaggio, I will have problems. But if I stay light like I did there, I can make it through that transition point, and I can carry through a lot of the resonance by staying released in the soft tissues of my oral cavity, and that will make the timbres match much better. Let me know if that's what your question is about, and if I have answered it adequately. If you need to clarify it, please do in the chat. I'm going to keep on making my way down here. Um, Fahimuch, Fahim. Fahimuchi is saying, hello, this is the first time seeing us live here. Welcome, welcome. It's great to have you here. And you have a question. I have a question. I have been suffering from sinus infection. Prevents me from singing and even talking probably. I can't do vocal fry. Let me skip down and see if you've... Okay, so if you've got that bad of a sinus infection, and if you can't talk, then you really have to take some vocal rest. The general rule of thumb is that if you cannot vocalize above the secondo passaggio, then you're too sick to really sing. Now, I don't know how much the sinus infection is costing you, like energy-wise, like if you're feeling really fatigued and tired. It's usually then that we get into problems and can constrain our voices because we just don't have the physical energy to support our voice in such a fashion that it can release. And that's when we start using more muscle tension, and that's when we induce fatigue. So if you can't talk, I'm really sorry, but I think you probably need to take some time off. And if you could see an ENT or even your general practitioner and make sure that everything is okay, that would be even better. Because I'm not a doctor, and I cannot really speak towards infections and things like that. But if you can't talk, then singing is out of the question. Skite Hussein. My tone is much different in head and chest voice. What is the reason of it, and what can I do to improve it? That's a great question. Thank you. Thank you for asking that. Which I might actually say that about everything I've had so far. It's really, really cool. Okay. So, a couple things. I've never heard you sing, so I can only kind of guess at the general reasons why you're experiencing a difference in tone. I would ask you, first and foremost, if you have recorded yourself, because the internal, like if you've ever heard your recorded voice and you're like, wow, that sounds a lot different than I thought. That's because there's a lot of bone conductivity and resonance that occurs internally. This is true when you're singing just as much as it's true when you're speaking. So, my first question for you is, have you recorded yourself, and is there a difference? There may not be as much of a difference as it feels internally and as you hear inside. The internal experience of our voices, even when things are well aligned and you've had a lot of experience making your transition through the secondo passaggio, still sounds different, and it still takes a bit of getting used to. It's something that we all, speaking for myself as well, have to remind ourselves from time to time that the internal and external experiences are different. If you have in the past squeezed out your high notes or tried to belt them out, and now you're trying to make a smooth transition through the secondo passaggio, which requires a much, much lighter muscular approach to singing in that range, then the feeling of singing is going to be dramatically different from what you had been accustomed to before. We have to learn to separate the physical experience of what it feels like versus what the sound is externally as well too. When I'm teaching, I don't think I say this in the videos very much, but in lessons, I very frequently will say something to the effect, well, specifically I'll say, what is the physical experience of that like? Particularly I'll say that when things are going well, because I want the vocalist with whom I'm working to vocalize what they are experiencing internally. Words like light, focused, effortless come out when things are going well. Singing it's hard, and it takes a lot of physicality, but it's different than often we've learned to do if we've learned to squeeze things out. And then finally, from a more practical standpoint, it could be just where you are developmentally with your transition through the secondo passaggio. Initially, if you have in the past squeezed things out, and perhaps even if you didn't, the initial notes above the secondo passaggio can be quite hollow sounding. You, 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 before the cricothyroid muscles are sufficiently developed to work in conjunction with the thyroarytenoid muscles. The thyroarytenoid muscles control your chest voice. So if you're just starting to make that transition, there can be quite a dramatic difference in resonance then after a time. And additionally, I would say too that when you're first working on this transition, you're working kind of on gross musculature coordination, just getting the cricothyroids, really allowing them to elongate the vocal fold. Once that is concretely part of your technique, then you can start working on releasing soft tissues and releasing more of the surrounding musculature and surrounding soft tissue in order to have those resonances that will carry through the zona di passaggio and ultimately into your upper register. I hope that helps. Blue third up. What are my suggestions for songs with long phrases? Depends a bit on the long phrase. Thank you. That's a really cool question. I am not one of those vocal instructors that I'm so miserable about scrolling on this thing. Yikes. I've gotta move more quickly, don't I? Long phrases. Depends a bit on the phrase. If it's very, very legato and there are few consonants in the phrase, then you may have to top up your breath a little bit more fully before the beginning of the phrase. If there are sufficient consonants, then again, depending on the music, I may suggest that you take more frequent breaths of shorter duration. You know, like if you were doing, I don't know if any of you are familiar with Ani DeFranco. Ani DeFranco writes beautiful but incredibly verbose songs. There's like 1,000 words in these songs. There's so many lyrics to these tunes. And there's barely a place to breathe, like a Rufus Wainwright song too. There's very few places to breathe. So you have to take your breaths whenever and as frequently as you can get them. If you've got a lot of lyrics in your song and you're taking more frequent breaths, you can take smaller breaths, and so they pose less of a disruption in your phrase. If you've got really, really long phrases that will not allow for that kind of treatment, then you're going to have to really, really take a very sufficient breath before that phrase begins. That could mean cutting off the note prior to that phrase a little bit earlier in order to allow for a full breath. It pays to really focus on the efficiency and the formation alignment of your vowels through those phrases as well, so that you have as efficient a phonation as you can possibly achieve. Additionally, if there are any opportunities in those kinds of phrases of any kind where there's a consonant at the end of a word and there's an opportunity for a breath of any duration, I would take it until it seems like it's not necessary. Practicing those long phrases with a lip trill can be a great way to work on that efficiency. And then going through it with like just an E vowel, like really, really efficient uses of the voice to see what the breathing is going to be like, and then work on your vowels, and then put the consonants back in. Pays to consider that anytime you introduce a consonant or a break in a phrase, you spill a bit of air. That's a little bit inefficient when those are there. So phrasing through the consonants can heighten, can increase your efficiency as well in those really, really long phrases. Great question. Thank you. Hello and greetings from New York City, says Robert. Thank you. Thank you. Greetings from England. Capone, my favorite singer now is Peter Hamill, and he is doing head nodding and make vibrato. Is it okay to do this? I wouldn't recommend it. I'd have to check it out to really, really weigh in on that. And it may be a stylistic thing that's unique to his way of doing it. There are things, a lot of vocalists will do things that are stylistically really, really great for them, for that vocalist. But it doesn't necessarily pay for the rest of us to emulate that kind of behavior. Let me make a note of that, Capone, and I will check it out. And then I can maybe speak to that more fully next time. But in general, like head nodding, waving of the arms. I've like lost all my pens. 1 second. Got my official YouTube pen here. Head nodding, waving of the arms, like that's another way that people will sometimes shake their vibrato. Those can be useful tools to get a vibrato to kind of get started for you, but not something that I really want to rely on long term. I think of it as an intermediary to being able to create vibrato. And furthermore, I don't so much think about creating vibrato as allowing it to occur. Once you really get a vibrato rolling, you can quickly come to the realization that actually the vibrato is a more released state of the vocal fold. To sing with a straight tone requires more muscle engagement. So in fact, the vibrato is the naturally occurring voice when we have good engagement and good vocal fold tension at the larynx. When those two things are working together, the vibrato will kind of naturally start rolling out. It's to sing with a straight tone that requires us to do something actively. But let me check him out. Okay. Tadeus, my vocal range is A sharp 1 to F4, and above F4 I mix to G5. My head voice goes up to F6, and I can go to F7 and whistle. Okay. Oh, what voice type? Interesting. The thing that I find somewhat odd, the thing that's odd about that when I look at it this way is that A sharp 1. That's the thing that is confusing. I would want to know what the range is where it all sounds consistent, where it's all equally balanced and in tune tone production. Because that F4 speaks to, sort of like tenor things, but to be more specific than that, it's hard to say. The other thing that's somewhat anomalous there is the mix up to G5, and furthermore, head voice up to F6 doesn't really jive with any known vocal range that I'm familiar with, quite frankly. Actually, now that I read that some more, yeah. Furthermore, that's not a typical usage of the thought of mixing. Yeah, but obviously some transitions occurring for you at F4, whether you call it mix and whether it is mix or not remains to be seen. But yeah, something like that. Carlos, hello. Today, as a voice teacher told me I'm a countertenor after listening to my timbre of voice. Well, that's cool. Then yeah, that seems about right. Again, focusing on that F4 area. Capone, you are bass, Tadeus, but how you go so high? Tadeus, Capone, you guys are talking. Mar Velasquez, hola, ¿cómo estás? I think that's asking me how I'm doing, and I'm doing quite well. Thank you. Thank you. Gerald Ryan, I'm doing quite well. Thank you. The migraines have subsided. Wade, hello, Jeff. Can you do a video to show you are a true baritone or a true tenor? Tenor, I suppose that means ETC, and a video to show how many octaves you actually sing. I'm not sure what ET means. But the fact is, if you sift through the videos, you'll see I don't really ever sing lower than an A natural below low C, and you'll hear that the timbre of my voice is a little bit funky. And then in the falsetto video, I think I sing. Do I sing a high C in that? I maybe do. I'm not sure. But at the beginning of this live event, I sang a B natural right below high C. But I can assure you that my transition point's at between F sharp above middle C, and it puts me in tenor land. Rahul, hello, and hello to you. Maureen, welcome. Nancy says, thank you very much. You're very, very welcome. It was helpful. Good. Excellent. Good evening, Slana. Blue third up. Sometimes I find it hard to sing E vowel as in, A, in May. What might be the cause? That vowel can be a little tricky. It's not really a very narrow vowel. It's not a very wide vowel either. And while it kind of feels a lot like E, May, it leans a bit towards ah, and the tendency can be to widen it, May, where it spreads laterally through the face. The trick, it's not a trick, it's just the technique to keeping it narrower is to try to be aware of your tongue, the rear of your tongue. When you sing E, me, you can feel that there's a lift at the rear of the tongue, where some might call it bridging the molars, where it feels like it's lifted quite high in the rear. And when we go from E to A, if we allow that to fall too much, me, we get that kind of sound, and so that's not very useful for us. We have to try to keep that tongue a little lifted in the rear of the oral cavity. Me, and that'll give us a better formed A vowel. So the cause may be that it's the rear of the tongue is dropping too much and it's causing the vowel to spread. Tadeus, do you have any greatly effective breathing exercises? There's a ton of breathing exercises in the Apogeo breath management video, and I'm very fond of this diaphragmatic breathing exercise video where I integrate some of the breathing exercises into the interstitial spaces between the exercises, and I find it a very, very effective way to practice. So that may be something to check out. And then there's like some others. There's like a lip trill madness video, which is just a bunch of lip trill stuff. But my favorite one, I think it's in the resonance video. No, it's the tonal onset video. In the tonal onset video, I do this exercise, which is a short note, short breath, short note, short breath, followed by a scale. He, 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 he. And there's so much wonderful stuff that we get to cover in that practice. The short notes help to balance vocal fold engagement versus airflow. The short breath disrupts the focus that you had in the previous note, meaning that you have to consciously try to reestablish that nice, well-balanced tonal onset the next time. And so you do like, four of them in a row, which is great practice. And then you get to feel what it's like in the long scale. That's the idea behind the long scale, is that you can feel what that well-aligned system feels like, and you keep on going. There are no long breaths in there, so the short breaths we have the opportunity to learn to make sure that we're taking just a little bit extra to get through the long scale, but not too much that we're getting too topped up with air, nor are we expelling too much and not taking enough and getting too low so that we cannot make it through the long scale. So that I find to be an incredibly efficient breathing exercise, great for coordination, great for alignment as well. Aldo, Maestro, I'm focusing on solfege and it helps me a lot. I will keep practicing this week also. Anyway, I wanted to buy a MacBook and spend like 3,000 euros on it, but I figured out that I can build a PC and have better specs. What do you suggest on Mac versus PC and audio production? Okay, that's an awesome question. Thank you for throwing that out there. Do you already have an audio interface is the question that I have for you in light of all of that. If you already have an interface and it's already meant for a Mac or a PC, then and if you really, really want to stick with that interface, then that may have a lot to do with your decision. Truthfully, I have only ever worked with Macintosh computers in pro audio scenarios. So to give you a brief history, I've worked in Pro Tools since version 4.3 or something. Now we're on version 12. So 20 years I've been working in Pro Tools. I can operate Logic, but I don't prefer to use Logic. And I now work in a program called Reaper. I've installed Cubase systems and worked in them briefly, but not for a very long period of time. And I've used other software like Reason as well. I've always used Macs for audio production. The platform it now is very, very stable. Integration of almost any interface is very, very easy. And what that means is that you're working instead of troubleshooting your sound card, talking to the interface or whatever. But unfortunately, I can't really offer a PC perspective on this. If someone's working in PC and pro audio, perhaps they could enlighten us or throw that out there. But if it were up to me, I would probably try to figure out a way to get the Mac. But if you already have an interface and it already works with a PC, then you may decide that that's the better route to go. If the PC is going to allow you to get better mics or better preamps, that's something to consider as well too. When you consider your recording systems, there's so many different things to think about. The genre, for that matter, that you're going to be creating. If you're going to be recording more live instruments, you may need more microphones. You may need an interface with more inputs. That might mean saving money on the computer system. So that might drive your decision towards a PC. On the other hand, if you're only going to, you're only going to need two live inputs at any one time, then maybe you can spend a bit more money on the computer, still have money for the mics, but be able to work in the Mac platform. And FYI, Reaper is very, very cheap if you don't yet have a DAW system. Maureen, why do I always revert to chest voice when I perform in front of others, whereas on my own I practice in my mixed voice, which is my fave, as I can make my songs so much more interesting? Force of habit, probably, and nerves. Nerves can force us to do lots and lots of different things when we get in front of people, even if you're not feeling really, really nervous. That we can get into that heightened energerial state and start forcing our voice, and that can often lock us into our chest voices. But keep practicing. The more your technique gets concrete, in making that transition to the secondo passaggio, the more comfortable it'll become, and it will become ultimately your habit, particularly as you integrate that technique into new songs that you work on. There's an old saying that songs reflect our technique at the time that we learned it. So it's like the rings of a tree. when you chop down a tree, you can see all the different rings, and some of them will look different depending if it was like a drought or there was a fire or something like that. And when we learn a song, that song will often reflect what our technical understanding of the voice was at the time that we learned it. So that's another reason why to keep your repertoire shifting, keep moving through repertoire, and that can help change those habits. Just keep moving, and it will happen. Fahimuchi is saying thank you. I'm glad that you can talk again, but that's an awful lot of phlegm, and you're very, very welcome. Light connected head voice, wonderful. I believe my first bridge is around E4, my second bridge is around A4. That is entirely likely. I would have to consult my books as to what fosh that corresponds to. There are some tenor foshes that are in that area. It depends on the rest of your range and how that sounds. But that's likely. That corresponds. I want to say that corresponds to like a tenor robusto or something like that. But I would have to take a look. Fahirmuchi, C4 to C5 with a siren open vowels, but can only do it in a light volume. Fair enough. Dwayne, still working on strengthening the passaggio area and it's going well. That's awesome, Dwayne. Well done. Well done, you. I'm really, really glad that it's feeling more effortless and fun, as it should be. Tadeus, how do I keep my chest voice light? When we talk about light in regards to the thyroarytenoid dominant singing voice, that's the chest voice, what we're talking about is a balanced phonation. So if I'm here in my chest voice, that's focused and light and has a reasonable amount of resonance to it. I'm not pressing on the thyroarytenoid dominant muscle any more than is necessary. If I press too much, that's when it starts to get a little bit gritty. Now, there are times when one might want to do that, and that's fine. If you're going to ascend above the secondo passaggio, that might not be the time if you want to have a smooth transition. And so that's what we mean by light. Another way to frame that would be well balanced. That's what those short note exercises are so good at. He. We would call that a light approach to the thyroarytenoid dominant singing voice. Narrow is another way of putting it. Narrow, well aligned, released. I can add power from C4 to C5. I can add power below C4 and it gets down to F2. So is this my sinus issues preventing me, or are the vocal cords not strong enough? I honestly cannot say. I don't know. It could be your technicals. It could be your technical facility in the various ranges of your voice. It could be your overall development as a vocalist. It could be the sinus issues irritating the vocal fold with all the mucus. Any of those things are possible. Skype, I record myself. It usually is in tune, but the tone is not good to me. In head, in chest, it's okay. Now, if I remember correctly, that was the question about the differences in timbre. So the question then becomes, is the chest voice sufficiently narrow? Are the vowels aligned, and are you using your voice efficiently? That's going to allow you to carry release into the zona di passaggio and up above the secondo passaggio. That, in conjunction with vowel modification to make sure that airflow is increasing through the secondo passaggio, can help maintain that resonance. So all of these things work together, and that's why it's so important to try to develop your chest voice sufficiently and understand the differences between, having a light, well-aligned approach versus a heavier, like pushy, thyroarytenoid dominant and kind of squeezy approach, because that squeezy approach is going to prevent that resonance from being maintained as you ascend. Carlos Estrada, can every male sing in a whistle register? That's an awfully wide generalization. And the answer I would say is no, because I have to imagine that there is a male vocalist somewhere out there, or just a male. You haven't specified male vocalist, but a male somewhere who has some type of physical impediment that would prevent them from singing in the whistle register. So honestly, I don't know. I suppose it's possible for us to develop it. When we do the whistle tones, the epiglottis is covering the vocal folds, so it really creates an aperture that is really truly like a whistle. I must admit, it's not something I've spent any amount of time practicing or exploring. But if it's something that interests you, there's certainly lots of information out there. Like most everything else, it does, from my understanding of it, still require good airflow and engagement. And while I don't know that it necessitates a smooth transition through the secondo passaggio, I suspect that it can't hurt. The Mobe. Hello again. Welcome back. Stefan Salvatore, how do I add more power from the C4 to C5? I can sing light and connected, but not falsetto. But I can't add power. So how can I strengthen my mixed voice? I really want a chest-dominant mixed voice. Airflow is going to be... airflow is going to be really, really crucial in order to keep the vocal fold released. If you start getting muscle heavy as you make that ascent, you will additionally dampen down the resonance in the oral cavity, in the soft tissues of your oral cavity. So you have to maintain, you need a lot of airflow in order to keep the vocal folds released. One of my favorite exercises to help with that is I call it the super lip trill. It's in a couple of the videos, but it's where you grab the cheeks and pull. It really, really gets you in touch with those abdominal muscles and how they lift to engage with the diaphragm. And that's the kind of airflow that we need to have as we ascend towards C5. I would also suggest to you that what you are, it isn't, if you are making the transition, and some will argue against this, but making that transition through the secondo passaggio is a necessity to have a very powerful C, high C, for the male vocalist. It is about resonance, not the physical experience of it. So, yep. When we're here, it's about staying loose and keeping things open in order to keep the resonances intact as we continue to ascend up towards that high C. If we don't stay open, if we don't keep the airflow moving, we're going to quickly run out of space, and best case scenario, going to have some severe intonation problems. Worst case scenarios, we're just going to be singing the wrong note and straining our voices. So you really, really got to keep the air moving. Sandra, do you have any suggestions how I can properly work on my vocal range between C6 and B6 so I don't only get the notes staccato, but also legato and let them vibrate? Similar to Stefan's question, it's going to boil down to maintaining very, very consistent airflow. And the transition, when you've got a well-adducted vocal fold in that range, one of the great ways to start making that transition is with the super lip trill, working your exercises with that in legato phrases. You will have to. There is certainly going to be a difference in the internal versus external experience of that as well if you're staying open, if you're staying loose in that register. So yeah, airflow is going to be crucial. It's going to be absolutely crucial. Jake, 3048, what tips do you have for improving vocal endurance or getting the vocal tone that you want recording yourself back to make sure it sounds good? And it does, but having trouble sustaining that. I need to read that again. What tips do you have for improving vocal endurance or getting the vocal tone that you want recording yourself back to make sure it sounds good? And it does, but having trouble sustaining that. I don't understand the end of that. The main tip for vocal endurance is an analogy that I use, which is a bag of groceries. It's the bag of groceries analogy. I don't know if I've shared this with the channel or not. But the idea is if I asked you to stick your hand out, and then I took a bag of groceries, and I put that bag of groceries in your hand, and then we just stood there. Over time, it would start to feel heavier and heavier and heavier, even though nothing was changing. And I assure you that the idea is that nothing changes. So I'm not like, dropping oranges into it while you're standing there. Everything is remaining absolutely the same. But over time, your arm is going to start to feel the lactic acid build up and it's going to start to feel heavier and heavier and heavier until you drop it. Vocal endurance is kind of like that, but it takes a lot less time for us to get there. Because it works in conjunction with a depletion of the air that's you're holding in your body. So when you're singing, where do I want that? Here is comfortable. Those long phrases with the trills are a great way to work on endurance because we get the feeling of holding and sustaining the low, sustaining that trill, and we have to keep the air flowing smoothly. And so the thing is to keep lifting and lifting and lifting and lifting and lifting all the way through that. Really, really, really lifting all the way through that phrase to keep the energy moving forward. That helps more with endurance than virtually anything else I've ever worked on. It's part concept and applying that concept to our practice of keeping it moving through the line. The Mober. I was wondering about the 2 warm-up with lyrics videos you did. Are they meant to be done singularly, or can I mix both videos into one warm-up? Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you could really do it either way. I think the second one, I'm trying to remember now. I think the second one has a few. I think the exercises that go over the secondo passaggio in the second one are a little bit trickier than the first one. So you might want to keep that second, but depending on how things are going, I think in time it won't matter. So yeah, you can do them together. You can do them separately. I think that whatever serves your warm-up purposes is good. You may find that one suits you better than the other. I'm not entirely sure. But yeah. I thought of that as I thought of them in doing the second one. It was kind of a sequential thing, but I wouldn't say it's obligatory. Praveen, hello from Canada. Hello in Canada. I hope you're still there. Been working on pitch issues. I really like your studies into the intervals, like the fourths. Do you have any MP3 CDs that systematically go through those intervals? I haven't done those yet. There's a bunch of stuff on the jeffrolka.com website, but I haven't put those on there. But if that's something that you'd like, then I could do. I'm kind of overdue for an intervallic warm up, and the next one that I do with intervals, then I'll make that available on the website as well. And working on pitch. Sure. Pitch is obviously we want to sing in tune. I've got to hurry up here. Yeah, working on pitch. So yes, Heidi is talking to you, Praveen. I can see down there the solfege. Solfege is gonna really, really help you sharpen your oral acuity, how you hear intervals and how you hear them in the context of the music that you're singing. So the solfege will help a lot. Um, that's the conceptual part of it. The practical side of it is making sure that you're only using as much vocal fold engagement as is absolutely necessary at any given time. And that means having a well-aligned system. That means having good alignment of the vowels, having sufficient airflow to the range that you're singing in. That can also mean the environment. Pitch is also dependent on your environment. If you're singing with a loud rock band and you can't hear yourself, the tendency will be to push. If you have had in the past or still do have the habit of pushing as you ascend, that can impact your intonation as well. We have to use airflow and alignment of vowels to make sure that we're using only as much vocal fold engagement as is absolutely necessary in the range that we are. Gerald Ryan, I'm feeling weird when I'm listening to my own voice. I don't know why. I think that listening to one's own voice can be a bit I can personally feel very vulnerable when I listen to myself sing. I don't know if that's what you're talking about or not. But I think yeah, I think it's quite natural to hear one's recorded voice and have it feel a bit funny for a little while. You do get used to it. At least I have in time. James Raymond, it seems like when I sing hard in my chest voice, I can't get into head voice. That's very, very true. When you are too heavy with the thyroarytenoid dominant muscles, those thyroarytenoid muscles, when you're too heavy on those, it can prevent the cricothyroid muscles from elongating the vocal fold. So thyroarytenoid is chest voice. They're the muscles that are underneath the vocal fold, underneath the ligament and the mucus. The cricothyroids are attached at the posterior and anterior points on the ends of it. When we go into head voice, the cricothyroid muscles elongate the vocal fold. So yeah, if you're too heavy, it won't let you do it. How can you belt in a high range for tenors? Well, I don't recommend that you do, in fact. If you are going to do that, I recommend that you limit yourself to a major second above the secondo passaggio. Any more than that, and then you risk vocal fatigue and other problems. There's a lot of contention around this topic. But the definition of a belt, or entering the call of the voice, is that you force the thyroarytenoid muscles to go higher and higher and higher and do not allow the cricothyroids to elongate the vocal fold. And that, in my experience, increases vocal fold tension and fatigue and is ultimately unsustainable. So my advice is to learn to make a very, very smooth transition through the secondo passaggio for notes that are above, a major second above your secondo passaggio. Sandra is talking to Gerald Ryan. The Mobra, a few days ago when singing, I decided to have some chewing gum. One thing I find that is very beneficial for me is that it keeps my mouth wet and moist. What's your opinion on me using it? If it works for you, more power to you. I think that each one of us has to be aware of what works and does not work for us. But if it works for you, then by all means, that's great. I think that's a great little quick fix to have in your back pocket for those times when you might be feeling a bit dry and pasty. I would be careful about your teeth, though. If it's if it's sugar-free, then it won't mess up your teeth. But if it's got sugar in it, then you need to make sure that you're taking care of your chompers, because you don't want any cavities. James Raymond, also having trouble with raspiness, especially the ah vowel and e. It depends on the kind of raspiness. Those vowels are diametrically opposites in terms of their focus. Ah being quite open and wide, and E being quite narrow. My suspicion is that you're including a little bit of vocal fry, that there's not. So you're getting like a E, ah in there. That can be kind of a useful effect from time to time. And in that instance, what's happening is that I'm tensing up my vocal fold a little bit, and I'm keeping it separated so that the ligament is buzzing along like that. Now, if that's what you're doing, then try some of the short exercises so that you can get a little bit more vocal fold release and get the vocal fold to adduct entirely. You're only getting a partial adduction of the vocal fold, if that's what's happening for you. Tadeus, how do I release tongue and jaw tension? I did a video on it. So I think it is like how to release tongue tension or how to release jaw tension. And I go through a bunch of different stuff where you're holding the jaw open, and that can help to take some of the engagement out of it, and also sticking and holding the tongue out. Doing those exercises can make you aware of when you are subconsciously tensing the musculature in the tongue and the jaw, and by becoming aware of it, you can learn to stay more released and open in that position. And in the video with the tongue, I go through several different stages where you're holding it, where it's laying on the lip, and then where it's back in the mouth. Gerald Ryan, you're very welcome. And for those of you who aren't aware of it, I just started a closed Facebook group to, share information, talk about different stuff. It's what I'm hoping to have is an area where we can share sequences of videos once my book comes out. So when people find like a cool sequence that they're working on, they're like, oh, I do this warm up and that warm up and then this technical exercise, and then I'm like really psyched. That would be the place where we'd share it along with other information. And people have been sharing little performances, and we've been talking about it a little bit too. So that's, if you look for my name, the group is called Sequencer. Totally open to a new name. It was just what I came up with. I'm not like sold on it. But yeah, it's been really, really fun, and it's been really fun to just talk with people and share different performances. Benson, do I recommend singing the warm-up videos at different volumes? Not really. My recommendation is to allow your volume to track along with the range that you are in. So if you are in your chest voice, then my hope would be that you would be singing with a natural phonation for that range of your voice. As you ascend through the secondo passaggio, because of the release in airflow, because of the increase in airflow and the continued release of the soft tissue in your oral cavity, resonance will increase, and consequently volume will increase as well. That being said, it's entirely plausible and could be quite useful to practice some of the videos at different volumes, knowing full well that there's a bottom line that you have to stay above. I would never recommend practicing them where the timbre was not consistent throughout your range, unless that's what you're going for. And if that's what you're practicing, then by all means, do. Mrs. Webster, shoot, got the time zone wrong and arrived at the end. So glad you post these for later watching. You're very welcome. Yeah, that's cool. We're still going a little bit. I'm gonna try and take what I've got on screen. I'm gonna do a kind of a speed round here, but I do need to wrap this up. Mrs. Webster, sometime I'd like to hear how to do beautiful notes at the top of my range in dynamics like mezzo piano to pianissimo. Well, as I just mentioned to Benson, there's a baseline dynamic that you need to create at any given point in your range for consistent phonation from top to bottom. Now, if you are okay with subtle changes in resonances and phonation, then mezzo piano and pianissimo becomes more possible. Perhaps the biggest key to that is that, paradoxically, our engagement, the engagement of our core muscles and abdominal muscles particularly, seems to increase exponentially the lower our volume is in order to have consistent released phonation. So the short answer to that is make sure that you're engaging lots. Really, really get your support underneath you. And I would recommend that you start with consistent phonation throughout your range, so consistent timbre. And then as you gain flexibility and gain expertise in that, then if you want to experiment with different styles of phonation, allowing for a little bit more falsetto tone production, for example, or perhaps in your cricothyroid dominant range, a much greater emphasis on the cricothyroid muscles, which will have a subtle shift in the timbre, then by all means go for it. The Mober, I find it seems to take me quite a while before I sing to massage out the tightness in my neck and shoulder area. Any advice for stopping all this tightness? I'm 17, so maybe it's just natural. No, man, I share that with you. I would just be in motion as much as possible. So while you're doing your warm-ups, just be rolling your shoulders, move your arms, walk around the room, stay in motion, be a bit of a bobblehead, if you know what that is, where your head's in constant motion. Use a mirror and make sure that you're not moving along with the exercise. So, for example, if you're going, E-A-O, that's not released motion. We want E-A-O, movement that is not along with what you're singing. How do you know if you are placing your voice properly in the pocket for your voice type? The most effective way to... Okay, so when we talk about pocket, normally we're talking about timing. That's normally a rhythm question, Jake 3048. Now, if by pocket what you mean here is a well-aligned vowel sound, then there's a few tests. I mean, if you can sing all your vowels and they sound similar, then you're probably in the pocket. If they don't sound the same, then you're probably not in the pocket, and you need to address the alignment of the vowels. Blue third up. What are your suggestions for singing ascending chromatic passages, especially around the break area? Oh, those are tricky indeed. That's awesome. I would do a lot of key shifting on this. If I had a song with a chromatic passage, I would draw, and depending on the vowel sounds or the words in there too, then I would drop it by as much as a perfect fourth and work through the passage, perhaps first on the lip trill, then on a solid vowel, then work to get my vowels for the passage in perfect alignment, or as perfect as it's going to be, and then start the process of first moving it up to performance tempo and then moving it back up to performance key. It's kind of a protracted experience, but that would be the way to do it, to make sure that it was nice and fluid and effortless. Mrs. Webster, ooh, I like what you said about keeping the repertoire building to continue growing my vocal abilities. That's an interesting perspective of a reflection of where I am in my vocal training. Cool. Maybe. Hi. Hello. I've been struggling with passaggio exercises. My voice seems to come very weak from D4. Where'd it go again? Jeez. I'm a man until G sharp, and in order to not break, even on a siren, I need to swallow my voice. Yeah. You are... It sounds like you're ascending. And I would suggest you descend for starters. Start on descending exercises. And it depends on what you mean by weak. If it's weak in terms of its airy, that's problematic, because that's the ligament probably. If it feels weak internally, but it's very hollow sounding, that's a discrepancy between what it feels like and what it sounds like. The hollowness, you will eventually be able to maintain more of your thyroarytenoid resonance as you ascend. But if it's airy and weak, that's a different problem altogether. But Yeah, start with your descending things, and if it's very open or hollow hoo descending, ooh, that's okay. That's just an imbalance in the resonators, and that you will eventually learn to balance out. But we need to be able to allow the cricothyroids to elongate the vocal fold in order to get that transition smooth and maintain those resonances. M, having resonate very far back in the head, which feels weird and introduces tension, which I feel shouldn't be necessary. Yes. If you're really pushing it back towards the nasal pharynx, that can be very instructive initially in terms of learning about how that pharynx resonance operates. But ultimately, we need to come to a more balanced position with it. And you're right, that tension, I feel, is unnecessary, but can be good in terms of generating awareness in the initial stages of learning to use our upper registers. You might try moving it forward. Try the NG exercise, that. And if it gets to be where it's like that, then you know you're too far back. If it gets to be that wasn't far enough forward for me to demonstrate. There it is. That's disconnected from the thyroarytenoid voice. It can be bright, but also have a connection to the chest voice. M, I can easily work with lip rolls, but as soon as I sing, I either have to be very dopey or just break. Thanks as usual for this very useful. You're very welcome. Yeah, the lip trill, we have to make a transition from lip trilling to solid vowel sounds. It's great for getting the muscles coordinated through the transition point, but it's not the end-all, be-all of exercises, I'm afraid. A useful tool for sure, though. Maddie, welcome back. I'm glad that you're enjoying the Facebook group. Gerald Ryan, can I do a video reaction to any singer? I don't know. I've never thought about it. What did you have in mind, Gerald Ryan? Maddie, I was wondering what advice you have for warming up in the morning. I feel that time of day is when is the hardest to find my resonance. Absolutely. If you've got to sing, the main thing I think about is trying to be awake earlier, like at least having 2 hours before I have to sing. So if you know you have to sing at 9 a.m., then by all means be up by 7 a.m., 6:30 be even better. And just get your body moving too. Do some like light calisthenics, do anything to just get your body awake as well. That's as much of a problem as the voice early in the morning. Kyra, any tips for a tired voice? Well, it depends on how tired. Ultimately, vocal rest is what it comes down to. Hydration is key for making sure that we don't get overly fatigued as well. Danilo is saying hello. I say hello back. I hope you're still here. Maureen, superb explanation. Thank you very much. You're very welcome, Maureen. Just to clarify, shall I keep my chest voice out of the equation and stick to my mix, which suits my personality and the image I want? I think that it's valuable for us. I don't recommend people belt, but I still do it from time to time because I don't know that I might want it at some point, and so I want to have a feel for it. I don't belt beyond a certain point because I feel that is not consistent with my overall vocal health. I think there's a value in learning about all the aspects of phonation for us. But when it comes to practicing your songs, I would practice the technique that you wish to perform with. Work that into the song so that they become integrated. Maureen, I overdeveloped my chest voice years ago, and because my passaggio was on non-existent, put me off singing for a long time till you discovered mix. Not one teacher told me about it. Yeah, I can dig it, I'm afraid. It's like a dirty... I hate to say it this way, but like transitioning through the secondo passaggio is like a dirty secret. It's like no one really wants to say that actually we're making a transition, but we are. We really are. We're just really making the resonances match very, very carefully. Danilo, Hi, Jeff. Want to do the workouts? Should I do all with my chest voice? I want to have that round voice even when I go high, question mark. Well, unfortunately, that would be inconsistent. The idea, if you want to have a full, rich sound above the secondo passaggio, then it is my opinion that we do that by learning to make a smooth transition through the secondo passaggio, which enables us to carry soft tissue resonances from the chest voice all the way up into the cricothyroid dominant singing voice and back down again. And that way we get a seamless transition up into our upper register, and we have that lovely, rich, round voice up high. But that is the result of a successful transition through the secondo passaggio. Tadeus, how do I maintain forward placement? And how do I know if I'm singing with forward placement, particularly in my mix? That NG exercise that I just talked about a second ago. And I do apologize for going so quickly, but I really want to take everyone's questions before I sign off for the night. That NG sound, you can really feel it in the mask. You'll feel it in the front. You don't want to overdo it because that gets a little bit questionable too. But you can certainly feel that brightness in the front of the mask. Praveen is saying thank you. You're very welcome. I do hope it helps. And Heidi's talking to you, Praveen. Jerica. Hello, Jeff. I'm chiming in late here. I'm the one that tweeted you on Twitter. I left a comment on a video as well, but my predicament is that I've noticed my pitch wavers unintentionally when singing. Kind of where it goes off in phrasing. Is it a breathing issue? What could I do to alleviate? If it's happening when you're phrasing, it's because you're probably disengaging too much of your abdominal musculature when you're taking your breath. Try to expand laterally to take the breath while maintaining at least 60% of your rectus abdominis muscle engagement. That lateral expansion will get the breath. When you retain that engagement in the front abdominal muscles, you'll get a cleaner re-entry, a cleaner tonal onset into the next phrase, and that can really dramatically improve your intonation. Heidi is saying thank you, and yes, awesome. I'm glad. I look forward to seeing you next week in JC's Radiant Ray. You're very welcome. Thank you so much, and goodbye. Excuse me. Tadeus, right, JC's Radiant Ray is addressing you with That's the Tongue and Larynx video. Thank you so much, JC's Radiant Ray. Blue Third Up, thank you again, Maestro. This is very informative. Thank you. I really appreciate it. I'll work on descending scales, then first. Excellent. And Jerica, mainly, Jeff, when I start my phrase is where it tends to wave. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah, you're very, very welcome. Thank you all so much. What an awesome event. Thank you, Jerica. Thank you so much. I know I went over. It was just so much good, and I really, really want to make sure I got everyone's questions. Have a great week. Take good care of your voices. Enjoy singing, and I will see you next time. Bye.